I'm Kari Borne. I'm from the Office of Continuing Education at UW-Whitewater, and we've been hosting the Fairhaven Lecture Series here at Fairhaven Senior Services since 1983. And each federal presidential election year, we focus on the election, and that's what we're doing this year too. So today we'll talk about debates with Dr. Corey Davis. He is professor and graduate program coordinator in the Department of Communication at UW-Whitewater, where he teaches courses in public relations, persuasion, and public political communication. He received his BS and MS in communication with a focus on political communication and public relations from Illinois State University, and he received his PhD in communication from the University of Missouri, where he focused on political campaign communications, media studies, and image repair. Corey's research interests are in political campaign communication, public rhetoric, and corporate and political image repair. Outside of academia, Corey designed and implemented curriculum and coordinated logistics for high school age students at leadership and technology themed conferences, ranging in size from 200 to 1,700 students at gatherings in California, New York, and the Washington, D.C. area. Prior to that experience, Corey worked as an appropriations analyst for the Illinois State Senate, briefing state senators, including then State Senator Barack Obama, on policy and political implications of pending budget legislation. He also has been a paid field operative for several political campaigns at multiple levels across the country. Corey lives in Whitewater with his wife and 3 children. Please welcome Dr. Corey Davis.
Thank you, Kari, for that introduction, and thank you so much to all of you for having me here today to talk about the 2024 presidential debates. I know several of you and recognize a lot of familiar faces in the audience, so always nice to have a friendly audience. And I think this is my 4th time, speaking in the Fairhaven Lecture Series. I think I've spoken, maybe this is the 2nd time that I've spoken on debates, and previously I've also spoken to you folks about convention nominating addresses at the Republican and Democratic conventions as well. But today, we are going to focus on the debates, but really just the debates. We only had one debate between Vice President Harris and former President Trump this year. Of course, we did have the earlier debate between President Biden and former President Trump, and I'll have a couple brief remarks. But for the most part, I'm going to focus on that other debate. But overall, we're going to talk about the evolution of presidential debates as a medium of political campaign communication. We could talk specifically about the functional theory of political campaign discourse, which is the theoretical lens that I use to interpret these debates and their persuasiveness. I'll give you some historical data from previous functional analyses of debates, including the 2016 debates for comparison. I'll present to you some fresh data from 2024, and then, of course, we'll have time for your questions. So, the first televised presidential debate was in 1960 between then Senator John F. Kennedy and former Vice President Richard M. Nixon. They actually debated 4 times. That first televised debate is the one that gets all the press, though. And as many of you have probably heard a lot of the conventional wisdom that people who listened on the radio thought Nixon won and people who watched on TV thought Kennedy won. Interesting, though, perhaps because many strategists and even voters credited those debates with boosting Kennedy in the polls, there were actually no debates held in 64, 68, or 72. So it was the only time that we saw Nixon in a presidential debate. And it wasn't until 1976 where we saw the presidential debates make a return. But since 1976, they've been a mainstay of U.S. presidential campaigns ever since. Some notable historic achievements in 1980 and 1992 were the only debates that included a third-party candidate. So in 1992, of course, we had Ross Perot, and in 1980, we had, I think it was Anderson was the third-party candidate who was in that debate along with Reagan and Carter. And then in 1992, we also had the first town hall format presidential debate. So some of the benefits that both political scientists and political communication scholars like myself have identified over the years and through social scientific research is that debates allow the voters to assess the qualifications and abilities of the candidates whom maybe are their sitting president, maybe who will be their future president. And importantly, it allows a literal side-by-side comparison so that voters can see the differences in the candidates' policy positions or their platform and the issues, as well as their character or personality. Jeffrey Auer in 1962 identified what he called criteria for a real debate. And in his 1962 study, that was a response to those 1960 debates that I mentioned a few minutes ago. And Auer didn't have a very high opinion of those presidential debates. He said they weren't a real debate in the spirit of what you might see from forensics teams or what you might see from a high school debate team, and certainly not what we saw from, for example, the Lincoln-Douglas debates from the 19th century. Because Auer said that to have what he considers a real debate, you need to have a confrontation, not a physical confrontation, and not even a screaming match, but you have to have a true back and forth between the two candidates. You have to have equal and adequate time, and we certainly don't have that. We didn't have it in 1960. We don't have it in 2024, and really any of the debates between. We don't provide equal time to the candidates on the stage. You have to have matched contestants, and we could argue that in some years we've had matched contestants, and in other years one contestant has been supremely outmatched by the other. The debate should be on a stated proposition. We rarely see this in the presidential debates either. Although we have had some instances in the past where maybe a debate was supposed to focus largely on domestic issues or largely on foreign policy and defense, that even those debates that were supposed to be the so-called foreign policy debate would still verge back into domestic policy territory. And even if you had a debate that was just on domestic policy, as we all know, that there's so many different issues within domestic policy. So rarely will we have a debate on just a stated proposition, and there should be, according to Auer, an audience decision. Well, again, we have plenty of post-debate polls and perhaps even more post-debate spin where the talking heads from all of the various cable networks, tell you immediately after who won and who lost. But even if our presidential debates fail to meet Jeffrey Auer's criteria, I think they're still worth having. And in our historic situation that we have here in 2024, I think there's a real danger that they might not continue, and that I hope that I can convince you today, just by the merits of looking at the data and just by the merits of having these side-by-side comparisons, that it's worth continuing to have our debates. The Commission on Presidential Debates is they call themselves nonpartisan, but really bipartisan, because one of their activities has been to actively exclude third-party candidates ever since Perot got on the stage in 1992. But for decades, the League of Women Voters was the longtime sponsor of presidential debates. But then in 1992, the Commission on Presidential Debates took over, or following the 1992 debates, the Commission took over the administration of those debates. And they are the ones that really, up until this past summer, set the rules for debates and for who could be in those debates. And I should clarify, set the rules for who could be in the general presidential debates, because the individual political parties, for example, in this past primary season, the Republican Party, the Republican Convention, and more specifically the state conventions in many cases, set the rules for which Republican candidates could participate in those debates. But in June 2024, we may have seen the death of the Commission on Presidential Debates, for better or for worse, because the Biden-Harris campaign, at that point, President Biden was the top of the ticket, and the Trump campaign both withdrew from what had been already established agreements for 3 presidential debates. Then the agreement was for 3 debates between President Biden, former President Trump, and 1 debate between the vice presidential candidates, which at that point in June had not yet been decided. And this was effectively the end of the commission. And really that was decided even before what happened on June 27th, 2024. And even before what happened on June 27th, 2024, we had an historic election. We had, for the first time since 1952, technically 1956, that we had a rematch. So ever since we had Adlai Stevenson in rematch versus sitting President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1956, this is the first time that we had a rematch. If former President Trump is, I guess we call it reelected, tomorrow, or certified in January. It'll also be that the first time since President Teddy Roosevelt that we've had a U.S. president serve 2 consecutive terms. So already we were set up for a lot of history in this campaign. But following a very poor debate performance by President Biden in the Biden-Trump debate on June 7th, 2024, a few weeks later, as we all know now, on July 21st, President Biden dropped out of the race and was replaced on the ticket, as we all know, by Vice President Harris. And after that happened, Harris and Trump agreed to just one debate. And there had been speculation for weeks, that maybe we'd get another debate, or maybe we'd have a town hall debate. But as we all now know, that never materialized. It's funny, when Kari and I were talking about what we were going to put in the descriptor for this program, I had a very long, detailed blurb, and then as the situation became murkier and murkier, Kari and I decided, well, maybe we should just make it as vague as possible, since we don't know who the debaters are going to be and how many times they're going to debate. So ultimately know that we just had the one debate on September 9th, which is going to be the data I'm going to share with you. And we also know that we did just have the one vice presidential debate, which is the norm, by the way. And that, of course, happened between Vance and Walz on October 1st. So we'll get back to that September debate between Harris and Trump in a few minutes. But first of all, I want to share with you the theoretical lens or the framework that I applied to the debate to understand, to break down the content and the meaning of their persuasive attacks and acclaims and defenses. So the functional theory of political campaign discourse was developed by my mentor at the University of Missouri, Professor Bill Benoit. I know that in French it should say Benoit, but I promise you he pronounces it Benoit. And Bill said that there are a few assumptions that we can make about political campaign discourse. First of all, he says that voting is a comparative act. So remember we went back to Auer, and he said, we should have a side-by-side, we should have a confrontation, we should have a side-by-side comparison. Benoit says that with or without debates, we all do that anyway, that we don't get to choose who all of us, we don't get to choose, none of us, I should say, get to choose who's going to be our ideal candidate. We don't get to handpick who we would like to be the president. We have a choice. And as many lament, it's sometimes not the best choices. But voting is a comparative act. In this election, the comparison is between former President Trump and Vice President Harris. And since voting is a comparative act, since candidates know that voters are going to have to make this choice between the two, candidates have to distinguish themselves. And this is true not just the presidential level, but in any other election. And political campaign messages are how candidates distinguish themselves from other candidates. They're how they differentiate each other. Candidates establish preferability through acclaiming, attacking, and defending. They can acclaim, they can make positive statements about themselves, they can attack, they can make negative statements about the candidate that they are facing off against, or their party, or their supporters. And the final assumption that Benoit makes in the functional theory of political campaign discourse is that not only can we make positive statements, negative statements, or defend ourselves against attacks, but that we can also talk about different topics. And most of that discourse falls into two major topics, policy and character. So again, yes, acclaims are the positive statements. And historically, these are the most frequent. And I know what you're thinking, and I know what you're maybe even muttering to your neighbor. No, I don't believe it. It's all so negative. All they ever do is tear each other down. All they ever do is gripe about how things are or what the other person did. And they do that a lot, but if we break down the data, if we look at the individual utterances or individual themes across all messages, not just looking at debate transcripts like I did for this presentation today, but also looking at political ads, also looking at those convention speeches or other speeches or rallies, or looking at even websites and social media posts, believe it or not, they are saying more positive historically, going all the way back to 1952, which is how far we've got basically in the television age. They acclaim more frequently than attack, and defenses are the least frequent. We can also break that discourse. We can break that communication into policy and character. And policy, we typically see candidates talk about what they've done, what they've accomplished, and it might be what they've done as an incumbent or what they've done in the previous term, what they did in the previous office, but it can also be talking about their past deeds, what they've already accomplished in the private sector too. But they also look more prospectively about their general goals, so just broadly what they want to accomplish or what they say they'll accomplish, and then more specifics, their future plans, specifically what they're going to do. So I'm going to cut your taxes. That's a general goal. I have already cut your taxes. That's a past deed. I'm going to cut your taxes by 15% with the targeted income tax increase on people of a higher economic bracket. That's a future plan. And those character statements, again, character statements they make about themselves or about the opposition, about the other candidate, those could be about their personal qualities. So I'm a good person. I'm a caring person. I love my family. I'm faithful to my spouse. It could be their ideals, what they believe in. So I believe in truth, justice, and the American way, the Superman values. Or they can comment on their leadership ability. And again, they can attack their opponent's ability to lead. They can attack their opponent's history as a leader. They can attack what their opponent believes in or claim that their opponent doesn't believe in anything. And again, rather than looking at the whole political ad, the whole 30-second ad, or the whole 60-second ad, or rather than looking at an entire speech and say, oh, that was mostly a policy speech, or that was mostly a positive speech. What Benoit and his colleagues and his students, my colleagues, what we do is we break down those messages into individual themes. And a theme is what Holste calls a single assertion regarding a given subject. So a theme can be as brief as a few words, or it might even be several sentences long. But that's the coding content. So when I show you later how many acclaims and how many attacks and how many defenses there were, that's not like how many times they got to speak, and then if that was overall an acclaim or attack defense, they might have spoken for 2 minutes or 6 minutes or 30 seconds, but within that 30 seconds, there might be 2 or 3 or 6 themes. Or within that 6-minute speaking time, they might have rattled off 30 to 50 different themes. So if I say, go back to that acclaim on ideals or a positive statement about what I believe in. If I tell you I believe in truth, justice, and the American way, it's actually 3 themes. Because I'm telling you, I believe in truth, I believe in justice, and I believe in the American way. So when you see, these numbers in the hundreds, the raw data that I'm going to share with you, that's how I get that data. That's how we get that's what the count is. That's what that is a tally of, is these individual utterances, themes within the broader statements. And again, each one I'm going to code on function, attack, acclaim, or defense. Positive statement, negative statement, defense against the negative statement, and then topic, policy and character. And again, we could break the policy further into past these general goals, future plans. We could break the character further into personal qualities, ideals, and leadership ability. For the purposes of what I'm going to share with you today at purposes of time, I'm not going to do the subtopic. I'm just going to share with you policy or character. So, again, what I'm doing is not a new method. It's not a new line of research. So, for example, in 2010, Benoit and his colleagues, me included, analyzed every televised presidential debate from 1960 up through 2008, which in 2010 obviously was the most recent presidential debate. And what we found over the course of that 48-year span was that overall, across all of those debates over the decades, across each debate in each of those campaign years, that 62% of the themes or the statements were positive. They're acclaims. 33% were attacks or negative statements about the other candidate or their party or their allies, and that just 5% were defenses. And incidentally, defenses are such a small proportion, such a small share of that overall amount, because for a few reasons, actually. They don't want to seem defensive. That they don't want to be seen by voters as defensive, the candidates, that is. Candidates also, they don't want to be taken off message by responding to what the other candidates said about them. They want to stick to their message. And we know that sometimes that means not actually answering the question the moderator has posed to them, right? They want to stay on message. And lastly, they don't want to run the risk of repeating something negative about themselves that voters might not have heard before. Now, that last drawback is the reason why defenses are even less common if we look at other message units, which we have, like websites or political ads or convention speeches, where defenses make up more like 1% of all. But they're more common in debates because there's the expectation that if somebody's attacked on stage, not physically attacked rhetorically, persuasively, that they'll respond. And if voters just heard the persuasive attack against them, they don't have to worry about repeating something the voters haven't already heard. So we still do see defenses a bit more often in presidential debates, but still not as often as we would in attacks or acclaims. And then finally, overwhelmingly, and I know, again, you say conventional wisdom, just, my perception tells me they don't talk enough about the issues. All they do is drag each other down and talk about what a great person they are. Well, they do that, but our research that says over the decades, overwhelmingly, especially in debates, they've talked so much more. 70% of the time they're talking about the issues. Historically. Now, starting with those 2016 debates between Secretary Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump, we saw that start to shift a little bit. So for Clinton's debate performance in 2016, and if you remember that this is some data I shared with you when I spoke here in 2016. It's okay if you don't remember. Clinton was acclaiming 54% of the time, attacking 36% of the time, and defending 10% of the time. Now, that level of defense, that's double the historic average. That's 10% instead of 5%, double the proportion. The acclaims, the attacks, about where they are historically, not a big change there. But as you can see, in 2016, Trump attacked 50% of the time. 50% of the persuasive appeals, 50% of the persuasive arguments he made were attacks or negative statements about Hillary Clinton or her policies or her character or her allies, her supporters or her fellow Democrats. And Trump also defended a lot more than we'd ever seen before, but at triple the proportion of what we'd seen before, 16% instead of 5%. But you ain't seen nothing yet. Policy and character, about the same. Those followed averages. Remember that it was typically closer to 70-30. Here we're closer to 60-40, but we're still overwhelmingly, it's about policy and the issues. Now, here we are in 2024. And in 2024, and to be clear, this only includes the one Harris-Trump debate. All right. So because it's two very different candidates, I didn't include the data from the Biden-Trump debate that we had earlier in the summer. But as you can see there, Harris still acclaimed more than she attacked, and obviously the defenses were the least. So Harris's proportions for acclaim, attack, defense, positive statements, negative statements, defenses against negative statements, still in line with those historical trends. But as you can see, Donald Trump more than doubled up attacks over claims. 55.2% of everything he said about his positions versus those of Harris were an attack on Harris's positions. He only acclaimed his own positions, policies, or character a quarter of the time. And as you can see, the defenses nearly doubled his level of defenses even from 2016 when he was at 10%. He now jumped to 19%. Now, part of that is that Harris is attacking more than Hillary Clinton did. So that makes sense, that if Harris is attacking more often than Hillary Clinton did in those 2016 debates, then we could expect that Trump needs to respond to more of those defenses. But that's the most attacks that we've seen in the history of presidential debates, or the greatest proportion of attacks, the greatest percentage of attacks that we've seen in the history of presidential debates. When it comes to topic, policy versus character, let's start at the bottom. Trump kept with historical trends. Trump actually did talk about policy and the issues more often than he talked about character. So at 59 to 41%, he's right in line with where he was back in 2016 and where Hillary Clinton was in 2016, right around that 60 to 40 split, right? But at 59-41. But we go back up to the top, and you can see Harris actually talked about character more than she talked about policy, at a proportion of 51% to 48%. So not a huge gap, but the surprising thing is that character eclipsed policy, which we'd never seen before in a presidential debate. I want to before I go off, you some implications for what this might mean, or what it could mean, or where do we go from here. I want to give you some examples of what some of these statements sounded like. So here's an example of an acclaim on policy, so a positive statement about policy from each candidate. So Harris says, "We are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase 3 million homes, increase by 3 million homes by the end of my first term." All right? So that is a future plan. That is a prospective, what she says she's going to accomplish. Here's an acclaim on policy for Trump. "So I got the oil business going like nobody has ever done before." All right? So now we could maybe say that, maybe it's a little bit about leadership ability, more character, but he's talking specifically about energy production. He's talking specifically about how he got people in the oil industry to produce more oil. That's a statement on policy. That's a statement on specifically his past deeds. Let's look at some attacks on policy. So we'll start with Harris. "When Donald Trump was president, 60 times he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act." So she's attacking what Trump did when he was in office from 2017 to 2021. Trump attacked on policy. "Obamacare was lousy health care. Always was. It's not very good today." So again, when you attack, you don't have to attack the person on the other side of the stage. As I said, you can also attack their policies. You can attack policies they agree with, or they can attack policies from their allies, like other people in their party. So here is an example. Trump is not directly attacking Kamala Harris. Instead, he is attacking Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, which was passed by the Obama administration and that Congress. Let's move to character. And again, we'll start with acclaims on character or candidates making positive statements about their own character. Here's Harris. I intend to be a president for all Americans and focus on what we can do over the next 10 and 20 years to build back up our country by investing right now in you, the American people. Now, maybe you're thinking, this could be policy, because she's talking about investing and she's talking about building back, but she's saying, I want to be a president for all Americans. She's talking about her leadership ability. She's not saying that she's going to invest in infrastructure, or that she's going to invest in healthcare or housing, like she said in that other statement. She's saying she's going to invest in the American people. Again, that's leadership ability. So this is an acclaim on character, on her ability to lead and be a leader for all people. Trump also acclaimed his character. Here's an example of one of Trump's statements acclaiming his own character. Also on leadership ability. We did things that nobody thought was possible. They give me credit for a lot of things. So he's talking about, and again, he's not talking about, he doesn't at least offer any specific policy achievements. So what he's really talking about here is his leadership ability. He's talking about what he accomplished as a leader, and presumably what he could accomplish again as a leader. Let's shift to attacks on character. So Harris said, you're going to hear from the same old tired playbook, a bunch of lies, grievances, and name-calling. So here she's attacking Donald Trump's personal qualities, which is an aspect of character. She's saying that he's a liar. She's saying that he engages in name-calling. And she's saying that he has a list of grievances and that he clings to those grievances. Those are attacks on Trump's character. And again, Trump also attacked on character. Here's an example of his. Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. Now, if he said she used to support X policy and now she supports Y policy, that would be an attack on her policies, right? That would be an attack on her general goals or her future plans. But he's attacking really here, he's attacking what she believed in. And he's saying that she doesn't have firm beliefs. He's attacking her ideals. He's attacking her character, specifically her ideals, and saying that she doesn't have, that she's maybe wishy-washy about what she believes in, or that she doesn't have firm beliefs. That's an attack on character. And then finally, I don't have defense on character and the defense on policy for each candidate for you. Again, I could find them for you, but because the defenses are so uncommon compared to the other two types of functions anyway, I've just got one for each of you. So I've got Harris, nowhere in America is a woman carrying a pregnancy to term and asking for an abortion. That is not happening. So that is responding to an attack by Trump, who right before that had said that in several states across the country that there were so-called partial birth abortions taking place. And she is refuting that specifically. Maybe I'll come back and talk to you sometime about persuasive attack and defense. But if we had to classify this defense, that would be a denial, that she's denying the attack, that this is even happening, let alone that she supports it. Trump, another example of a defense from Trump. Every one of these cases was started by them against their political opponent. And I'm winning most of them, and I will win the rest on appeal. Now, we could actually break this into a couple different themes here. So every one of those cases was started by them against their political opponent. So the first half of that quote that you've got up there, that's all a defense, but the first half of that is responding to, well, it's all responding to the fact that Harris has brought up his numerous charges that he's been brought up on, and in some places some convictions. And he's saying that all of those cases, that every one of the cases was brought up, that they were political. They brought up a political appointment. So again, if we had to classify this defense, I would say this is attacking accuser, that he's attacking the credibility or the integrity of Harris and Biden as political opponents or as public servants in general. The second half of this, and I'm winning most of them, and I will win the rest on appeal. Here, again, he's responding to the same attack, but he's using a different strategy of defense here, bolstering his resilience, and also saying that it doesn't even really matter because he will prevail in the end because he's so strong that he transcends these attacks. All right, so I've talked to you about Acclaims, positive statements versus attacks, negative statements versus defenses, versus policy versus character for those two topics in all those cases. And I've given you some examples of what these sounded like in the 2024 presidential debate between Harris and Trump. So what does it all mean in the grand scheme of things? So we started talking about the history of televised presidential debates in the United States, and they've become a ritual. They've become something that we expect along with the trips to Iowa and New Hampshire, and along with the steak fry, and along with getting your picture taken with the butter cow and everything else. It's part of what we expect from the culture of presidential campaigns. And functional theory, I've shared with you, provides a means of analyzing the function, a claim, attack, or defense, and the topic, policy or character, of individual themes across multiple forms of political campaign discourse. Again, we focus today on debates, but there are plenty of studies out there that I can share with you also about ads, convention speeches, websites, social media posts, etc. And over the decades, previous trends in those analyses of other debates have shown that debates were overall, regardless of what our perception might be, if we break down the individual transcripts and the actual utterances, that historically they've been more positive than negative, and they've been more focused on the issues than on personality. But as I shared with you in 2016, and now I'm sharing with you again in 2024, recent debates have bucked that trend. Specifically, we saw Donald Trump attack more often than acclaim and defend at a proportion of nearly double the historic average in 2016. In 2024, he attacked in an even greater proportion, attacking others over twice as often as he praised his own character or policy positions. And although Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris both paralleled historical trends, acclaiming more often than attacking, unlike Trump, Harris, we saw another bucking of a historic trend when this year Harris's acclaims outnumbered her attacks by a much narrower margin. But the big change here is that Harris talked about character more often than the issues in that 2024 debate between her and Donald Trump. Whereas Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump did stick to that trend of talking about policy more often than character. So immediately, not immediately. I'm going to take my son home first and maybe respond to some student emails. But most immediately among my research priorities, I need to go back and decode the debate transcripts from 2020. I was more focused on teaching online at that time. I'm going to code the Biden and Trump debate transcript from earlier this summer and the Vance-Walz debate script from earlier this autumn. I'm also going to analyze the news coverage 2020 and 2024. So the last time I was with you to talk about debates, I also had some data for you looking at the comparison of what the candidates actually said versus how much the news media reported on what they said, or how the news media reported on what they said. And guess what? One of the reasons that you think that these debates are all mudslinging and they're all focused on character and negativity is because the media over-reports on the mudslinging. The media over-reports on character aspects of the debate. They under-report the discussions of policy and issue differences, when they even bother to talk about what the candidates have said at all, because what they spend the most time talking about, as you would probably guess, is what we call horse race. Who's up, who's down, who was up 1% today versus 2% yesterday. So I'm going to look at a historical comparison of those with some 2024 data to go along with what we have before. But I also more in the long term, I have questions. I have questions as a researcher and a scholar, but I also have questions as a citizen. And I have questions about what we're going to demand of our elected officials, and what we're going to demand just of the people who want to be our elected officials. So will the Commission on Presidential Debates return? If you pin me down, I'd say probably not. I'd say no, because we'll allow the candidates to do whatever they want, which they sort of already did the way they bullied the Commission on Presidential Debates anyway, and the way they pushed the League of Women Voters out. So it would be great if the League of Women Voters would come back and do that as a truly nonpartisan organization, but I wouldn't get your hopes up. Will we return to the recent tradition of 4 debates? Well, that was what we had demanded as an electorate. That was what we had come to expect, and that was the standard that the Fourth Estate, that the media had also held them to. But now that they've wiggled out of that, I think it'll be hard to get them to go back to 3 presidential debates and 1 vice president debate. Will we get a town hall debate format? So what we saw this year, we saw Kamala Harris hold her own town hall, and we saw Donald Trump hold his own town hall, but they didn't have to talk to each other in front of voters. They didn't have to take questions directly from voters with both of them on the stage. We didn't get to hear each of them respond to the same question from a voter in the audience. And that town hall debate format that we first saw with George H.W. Bush versus Bill Clinton is one of the purest forms of presidential democracy that we've had in recent decades, and it was a real shame that we saw that go by the wayside this year also. So ultimately, I can forecast to you as a scholarly skeptic that I don't think these things are coming back. I don't think that we're going to get back to 3 debates and a vice presidential debate, and I don't think we're going to get back to town hall, and I don't think we're going to have a real nonpartisan org like the League of Women Voters make that happen. But it's up to us, because it is supposed to be for the people, by the people, right? So that's where I'll close, is that the future of presidential debates is what we as voters, whether we demand it of Republicans or Democrats or all candidates, it's what we demand. Thank you, and with that, I will open it up to any questions. I'd love to have your questions.